It's 9:30 on Thursday the 29th of November. Good morning and welcome to the Computer Channel. In this morning's live edition of analysis, by disk or by dial-up, BT's new directory products. Email and the environment. We visit GreenNet to see how it talks to its sister organisations. And a new book on the founder and son of IBM, a review by Rex Malik. But first, the news.
The headlines. Vendors claim illegal Unix installations reach 50%. Computer Associates slash SuperCalc prices. And at last, IBM's Color Portable arrives in the first quarter of next year.
Top Unix vendors are claiming that up to half the Unix programs used in the UK have been illegally installed. Interactive Systems, a Santa Cruz operation, and Informix blame third-party resellers rather than end users or MAS managers for the problem. They say resellers copy bought software onto customers' disks and walk off with the same disk for the next job, leaving customers with no support media. The Federation Against Software Theft, FAST, is to investigate the claims.
AT&T, France Telecom, British Telecom and Japan's KDD are to coordinate their provision of international private networks to multinational customers. This will effectively offer companies a one-stop shopping agreement when creating international communications links. In a separate agreement, France Telecom and Teleglobe Canada are making similar arrangements.
Acorn has tied up a major deal to develop reduced instruction set or RISC chips for Apple PCs. Acorn will work with the US group VLSI and so allow VLSI and Apple to co-design a new chip based around the Acorn's ARM processor. The new chip could drive the next generation of Macintosh PCs or operate as a support within the PC to manipulate peripherals such as printers.
Mercury Communications has ordered £22 million worth of ISDN-compatible switching equipment from STC. The equipment is to be made by Northern Telecom, one of STC's potential buyers. Mercury says its demand for switching equipment is steadily rising. In March 1989, 58,000 lines were on order for its Direct Connect business service. This figure rose to 98,000 a year later and to 120,000 by September this year.
Computer Associates is slashing the price of its SuperCalc spreadsheet to try and catch up rival package Lotus 123. The UK price of SuperCalc will fall 80% from £396 to just £79. Lotus dominates the market, but Computer Associates is promising a new version of SuperCalc 5.1 for early next year. That upgrade will cost existing users £25. Well, British Telecom will start charging for its directory inquiries service from next April. So what can your business do to try and keep down the cost of searching for numbers? Well, BT is offering two products it says will provide the answer. Alex Lester reports.
I see them being used instead of people ringing up the 192 directory inquiry service, particularly the heavier users of such a service. Phone base is particularly aimed at those people who want to make between 20 and 300 calls per week. We've done some calculations to take into account manager's time, operator time, and all that type of thing. Phone disk, on the other hand, is aimed at those folk who wish to find more than 300 numbers a week. So they are invariably the larger companies, and particularly people who can centralize their directory inquiry needs on a single point, for example, on their switchboard. Phone base, for example, could be used within a department on someone's desk, so that if they only require a modest number of numbers in the course of a week, they could get it from there.
Realistically, what advantages do these systems have over directory inquiries as we know it at present?
What they offer companies is more control over their costs. With phone base, as I say, you only pay for it as you use it. So if you know you're going to make only a relatively small number of calls in the course of a year, you can see approximately what it's going to cost you and keep your costs down. With phone disk, you know absolutely beforehand what your cost is going to be for the year. Obviously, you must take into account operator time on top of that.
So what equipment do you need to use both systems?
For phone base, you can run it from a personal computer equipped with a modem. You can also, in fact, get away with what's referred to as a dumb terminal, or as a straightforward black and white terminal, again equipped with a modem and connected to the central computer which runs the phone-based service. So it can be brought into play using really low-cost equipment. Phone disk, on the other hand, is a personal computer tool, so obviously you do require a true IBM-compatible PC, which can be anything from an 8086 chip machine right up to the fastest modern machines. You also require the compact disc drive, which is an additional and unusual new peripheral. It's very similar to the drive which is in your hi-fi to play music, except it's got some additional chips in it to look after error detection and correction, and obviously the interconnection with the PC.
Can you demonstrate Phonebase for us, first of all?
Yes, indeed. Phonebase is an online system which is connected to a central mainframe computer. It's very similar to the service used by our directory inquiry operators, and is a very powerful tool which is updated some 200,000 times a week. So it's very up-to-date indeed. And if you must have up-to-date information, it's the service to use. To do a search, we put in S for search at the command line, R for the residential file which we want to look at. And I'm going to look for someone who lives in Melksham. The person I want is Jones. And I can do the search based on that alone. Now, the person I want is actually the second of those people who is marked C. So I put in query C, and I'll command that again. I get the telephone number up like that. It's as simple as that. If you require a business number, you put in B for business file, and so on. You only pay for Phonebase as you use it. It's charged at the B1 charging rate, which is roughly between 6 and 13 pence per minute. So obviously you use it as much as you require and then simply log out again. It's intended for people who require between 20 and 300 numbers per week.
That's Phonebase. Can you demonstrate Phone Disk for us now?
Yes, indeed. Phone Disk is literally the 99 phone books on a single compact disc, just the same disc as you know to play beautiful music beautifully. A compact disc holds 550 megabytes of data, and that's sufficient to hold BT's database of published telephone numbers. And we read the compact disc in a personal computer using a special compact disc reader, which can be either built into the PC or can in fact be a separate unit. It's connected through an interface card in the usual way, and we get in from the DOS prompt by simply keying pdisk. One of the great advantages of Phonebase is that it can offer completely national searches. It's quite unique in that. So for example, if you know a company that exists somewhere in the country but you don't know exactly where they are, you can in fact find them by just putting in the name of the company. Take for example the Irish airline Ryanair. If you do a single search on that, without any further geographic information, it gives you all their listings just like that. And that's a very useful feature if, for example, you don't know where a new supplier actually is.
How much will the systems cost?
The Phonebase service is paid for as you use it. There's no joining fee whatever. It's charged at the B1 charging rate, which is roughly between 6 and 13 pence per minute, inclusive of VAT, depending on what time of the day you're actually making the call. So obviously if you make calls during the cheap period, it's cheaper to use. Phone Disk is a fixed cost option, and it's one of its great advantages. You pay £2,200 exclusive of VAT for the service, and for that you get a service of 4 quarterly discs. We will send you an update disc every quarter, and you would return the old disc to us, so ensuring that you are looking at the most up-to-date information that we can give you on compact disc.
For very large companies, don't you think they'd like to have multiple copies of the disc?
That is a possibility, and one of the future developments that we're looking at is the possibility of a networked version, which would enable more than one person to look at the system at a time.
But for the time being, would they get a discount, if you like, for multiple copies?
I'm afraid that's not our plan, because you are buying a service that's worth the same amount of money regardless.
Ken, it's a bit of a long-winded way of making one single sort of directory inquiry call, isn't it?
Well, I think the choice of actually having the disk is a good one, but I mean, having to go online, really all BT are doing is passing the buck, because that is effectively what happened when you phone directory inquiries. So now there's the charge of 43 pence, or go online yourself, and you've obviously got to have the computer equipment to do that, and a lot of people are not very happy with it.
Obviously, there's been a lot of criticism about the cost of a call, 43p or whatever. I mean, what's your opinion of it? Is it too much?
I think it is too much, yeah. From being totally free, they're obviously trying to reduce the amount, because the service became so well computerized, it was so efficient, more and more people used it. So they had a problem, because they were obviously paying for that usage. And they're penalizing everybody because of that. Now, really, the charge needs to be a little bit lower, and also the entry to these systems needs to be a bit lower, because market research companies like that that use the service a lot are still having to pay around about £5,000 to access it.
What about didn't they withdraw the phone disc actually quite shortly after we'd filmed the actual thing in demo?
We were told there were bugs in the disc, which was a bit alarming because it had been publicly touted for quite a while. We've now been told they're clear. Only usage can tell.
So you'll be able to buy one from next April?
You can buy one now, I believe, yeah.
Okay, well, thanks again. Well, this week in their contribution to the programme, the British Computer Society looks at the issue of management training for IT professionals. Speaker this week is Carol Beach.
Good morning. The information technology world, by its very nature, is full of able, technical people. People who are well qualified and have many years of experience. What it does not have in large numbers is people with managerial qualifications and training. It does, however, need them. It needs them now and will need them increasingly over the next decade. Why these people are needed and what you, the employers, can do about producing them is the subject of my talk today. First of all, let me give you a scenario. Remember, I am talking about senior managers who are likely to be in their mid-30s at least. And of course, many of them will be considerably older. Now, I am not for one moment suggesting that these people have not kept themselves up to date technically, or that you have not provided the wherewithal to enable them to do so. What I am saying is that when the majority of these people were at university or polytechnic getting their science qualification, there was nothing in the course that could be described as managerial training, and also that very little of the training they have had since then has contained any either. The other factor we have to take into account is that although computer projects are getting bigger and more complex, they're also getting less technical. Personally, I would be interested in finding out how many people still use assembler language. I do not think it is very many, and even COBOL is less widely used than it was 5 years ago. Also, as the need to become more globally competitive increases, the IT function of any company, be it large or small, must be well managed. So that is the scenario. You have technically able people without managerial training or experience, and the slot that some of them will fill requires both IT and managerial knowledge. Which brings me very nicely onto the next part of this talk, namely the type of person who will fit into this slot. Personality testing is becoming more widely used by employers to determine appropriate career paths. One of the most common, Myers-Briggs, uses indicator types, and these were used in some work done on IT staff profiles. The results showed 66% of IT staff were introvert, as against 33% of the general population. As might be expected, a high proportion were also thinking people and capable of making judgment. But when considering potential IT managers, look for the extrovert. By definition almost, a manager is someone who wants to work with and is capable of leading other people. Finally, having committed your company to provide business training for your IT managers, and for it to succeed, there must be commitment from the top. What options are available? These, of course, will depend on the size and structure of the company. But one of the most successful is the short total immersion course run externally. Other possibilities are hands-on business training, that is, doing a real job, or acting as a consultant to a business unit, participating in company-wide committees or user groups, preferably non-IT. Yes, of course there will be some disruption, some upheaval, some mistakes even. But to become globally competitive, and in some cases survive, your IT function must be well managed. And for that to happen, you must train your IT managers.
The Tory party's leadership election is getting local council DP departments hot under the collar. Promises of a poll tax review from Michael Heseltine have left them wondering whether development work on existing systems might well be thrown out of the window. This could happen if the government opts for a new system based on people's ability to pay, or even scraps the tax altogether as we return to the previous rate system. According to today's Computer Weekly, council DP managers have warned the cost of making major changes to the poll tax could run to £50 million and take up to a year to complete.
3 consortia, 2 foreign and 1 all Mexican, have applied to take over Mexico's telephone operator, Telmex. The announcements come a year after intense speculation about possible buyers for what is valued as the 5th largest PTO privatization in the world.
US reports suggest IBM is planning to unveil a colour laptop in the second quarter of next year. IBM demonstrated a colour laptop at the Comdex trade show in Las Vegas recently, but claimed it wouldn't be available for up to 18 months. Show visitors claim IBM's demo model was a production rather than a lab machine, and saying that a launch early next year is now on the cards.
Germany's Siemens is predicting a significant sales boost from reunification. Sales of phones to eastern states is expected to be worth 300 million Deutschmarks this year. Next year, Siemens expects to manufacture 100,000 lines of its ESWD public switching equipment in Leipzig. The company is predicting annual growth in this area to be worth 20 to 25%.
Disabled people are to benefit from the extension of an information database from the rest of Europe to the UK. HandyNet, the EEC's database of information for the disabled, will be available through the Disabled Living Foundation. It will offer advice on up to 15,000 technical aids to make everyday life easier. Government funding will establish the foundation itself as the UK's data collection centre and main access point for the database. Well, the name Tom Watson is these days more associated with golf, but it's also the name of the founding father of IBM and indeed his son. Now, the son has written his autobiography recounting his life in the company. The one and only Rex Malik has been looking at the book for us.
It is called Father, Son and Co. It's Tom Watson Jr.'s story. It's the story of the man who took IBM into the computer business, the life of one of the key fathers of computing. He ran IBM for 15 crucial years, the years of the latter 50s to early 70s. The years in which not only the hardware, but also the IBM look, the feel, the basic code spread across the major clients and became the foundations on which most of commercial computing still stands. So question, how did he come to run IBM? Well, he inherited it from father, hence the title. He used to account for his rise in IBM semi-jokingly by saying he had a friend in the company. The inheritance was in father's gift, for he'd put the company together, named it and built it. Tom Watson inherited a company which dominated the prior business of accounting machines, one that never sold, just rented. IBM was a cash-generating system, and Tom's father was for a long time the highest-paid executive in America. This is the tale then of how IBM, in turn, came to dominate the computer business. And it's also that of one man's relationship with his father, a tale of almost epic friction. For initially, father didn't believe in computers. That father-son struggle was to shape the computer industry. Tom Watson writes how he tried to get away both from father's presence and his shadow, first as a pilot in the Second World War. The Russian material is particularly good, then latter as a yachtsman. The book, though of uneven style, is full of insights into the nature of organizations and how they run. Tom Watson learnt lessons fast. He writes he only needed hitting on the head once. He realized early that given you could devise office systems capable of responding to executive need, operational life could be improved by good administrative and bureaucratic organization, and of course support. Company organization was thought through to achieve that. It had to be. In father's time, senior managerial decisions were whatever father decided. Then, though Tom Watson doesn't put it like that, management reorganization every 18 months or so became almost a way of life. It kept people awake. But it still doesn't answer the question, why IBM? Why not Sperry or Honeywell or CDC? Well, Tom Watson was a market share man, and that's what IBM's energies were bent to. Market share came first and last, and IBM held to that during the technological transition, and used every method that came to hand to do so. Question: how much of Electronic Japan's success is due to emulating Tom Watson's understanding of reality? A final thought. I have the suspicion that had father taken to the computer, IBM would not have become the company it did, and computing might have been very different. Perhaps father was better served by the eldest son than he knew? But, and here is another thought, were we?
Well, Rex Malik there with his very own view on a book review. Email has had its fair share of criticism, but at the end of the day, it's applications that prove its real value. Well, how green is your email system? This week, Computer Channel went to North London-based Software Solutions, a company which runs an email system with a definite green flavour.
GreenNet's an electronic mail system. We run our own host computer. We serve the non-profit sector that includes environmental groups, peace groups, human rights groups, and individuals interested in those issues.
Can you describe a typical day on the system?
We have individuals who are sending messages to other people that they know in other countries quite often, or they're checking conference areas which have information on a whole range of environmental and peace and development issues. We have groups like Oxfam who are using it to coordinate their area offices and be in touch with some of their overseas division offices. We'd have peace groups, particularly local activists, for example Disarm the Seas activists, who are using the conferencing and mail areas to coordinate their activities, put out action alerts when there are incidents. The submarine that was sunk in the Clyde recently, there was a flurry of activity around that, coordinating information and press work.
How many different conference areas are there?
There's maybe 300 or 400, subdivided along the broad issue areas that we cover.
And what's the kind of volume of traffic on all those areas?
It's hard to do a sort of good measure of that. What we swap between our other systems that we're linked to in other countries, we swap about 1 megabyte of data a day. That includes mail, private mail and conferencing, and it's probably about half conference material. Now some of that is staff use, but the bulk of it is publicly available information.
So what sort of costs are involved for those subscribing to the system?
We have very cheap basic rates to make them affordable for voluntary groups and individuals. There's a £15 registration fee, a £5 a month subscription, and it's 6p per minute of usage, and there's no sort of extra segment or volume charges to complicate matters. It's just your 6p per minute. There's also, and if you're accessing within the UK, you'll have a 3p per minute, which is given to BT to get you in through the lines to GreenNet.
Now, what kind of hardware are you using to actually run GreenNet?
It's run on a 386-based system with PC bus. We have SCSI interface disk drives, about 750 megabytes of disk at the moment. That can easily be expanded as we need it. We're using ordinary 2400 baud modems for dial-in for users, plus X25 access for calling from longer distances. And we do our main data transfers between our other systems in other countries using high-speed telebit modems and direct dial.
Now, you obviously deal with a lot of people who've never used this kind of technology before. What's it like trying to get them into the system?
We've got an extensive user manual, which people get automatically as part of their registration. That gets most people online. It gives them enough help that they need. We also have telephone support throughout office hours and some of the evening hours if people are here. We do a small amount of training. We don't really have the resources to do a lot ourselves. We also have people we can recommend who do training. Ordinary users will be coming in over the telephone networks or the X25 networks, so they'll be doing their preliminary bits with their modems, and then everyone will come in to a login prompt like this, and that's when you start talking to GreenNet. So I have to log in, give a password, then you get the welcome coming up on the screen. Tell them your terminal type, and the first messages you get are to tell you whether you have new entries in conference areas or new mail messages. The conference areas are just the regular ones you watch, so it's not all of the 400 of them. You pick the list that covers your interests. That means if you just want to check whether you've got anything new, in less than a minute you can do that and be logged off again and onto your other business. We're going to mainly take a look at the conferencing area, which we get to by a single letter command by typing C. We'll go and have a look at some of the liveliest conference areas on the system at the moment, and start with stuff around the Mideast crisis. There are actually about 5 conferences covering this area. This is the one that focuses on the actual crisis in the Gulf. There's one here from Australia called Behind the Gulf Crisis. We've typed the number to read it. This is some analysis from people in Australia presenting their views of what's going on, for example. You want to have a look and see if the response is. I'm not going to read the whole message on screen. Go to the response. There's somebody discussing the facts in the message. A reply to that, going into more detail, and more discussion again around the facts that have been put up on that.
On GreenNet, the emphasis is very much on the conferencing facilities, whereas on the PopTel system, which is based on the GeoNet electronic mail network, the emphasis is much more on messaging facilities and on access to database information.
What about X400?
As part of the GeoNet network, which is in fact the largest network, electronic mail network outside Britain and Europe, we have connections to the full X400 world, which basically means that you can send electronic mail between electronic mail networks as well as within them.
So what hardware are you actually using here to run the system?
Here in London we have the older GeoNet system called a Geo Roman 1 Plus, but we are in fact installing new equipment in our new setup in Manchester, which runs on DEC equipment, DEC Microvax equipment.
Who are the users at the moment, and what sort of use are they making?
Well, as I said before, we are used by some of the national trade unions in this country, national trade unions in other countries, the international federations of trade unions, the international trade secretariats as they're called, various large development organisations and human rights organisations who work internationally on the network. There are also cooperatives and voluntary organisations in this country, and also a number of commercial, straight up and down commercial companies who use the system.
So how do you plan to develop it from here?
Well, we're installing a new setup in Manchester. That's something which we're doing in cooperation with Manchester City Council, and it will be an electronic communications and information service for the Manchester City, and will connect Manchester into the international electronic world. One of the most important facilities there will be the database server which we're installing, which will enable users of the network in Manchester to make their information available to other users.
So Ken, what do users think of the GreenNet and PopTel services?
Well, it's difficult to know. Most of the users are very faithful, loyal supporters of the kind of services that are offering there, and they can't really go anywhere else, so they probably don't compare. But I spoke to one of the guests on the email dossier program that we're planning at the moment, and he said that his only criticism was the database was slightly slow. So maybe because they are such a small organisation, the kind of equipment they're using is perhaps in need of updating.
How are they coping with growth?
Well, they do have a bit of a problem. We talked to them about that while we were doing the interviews, and the situation is they've now got a contract with Manchester Council to set up a system there, and they say other councils are knocking on the door. And they're very small. They're a team of about 8 to 12 people. And they're facing a lot of problems about should they market themselves, should they designate clear job titles, because it's very much done as a small arrangement between the number of people there, and that they've potentially got a very big market, and they're going to have to make big decisions about how to compete against British Telecom and people like that, because they are now in the same market.
They are marketing themselves in a certain way. They're on open air, aren't they?
They're on the BBC on Monday, because they made a programme about the duopoly review, open access programme, so that should be interesting.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Well, this week in our comment section Viewpoint, Mike McGee of PC Business World tells us about a recent holiday he had at Club Med. But rather than a period of relaxation in the sun, it seems he spent the time taking the temperature of the computer industry.
A few weeks ago, I attended a shindig at the Club Med. where 400 chief executive officers from the computer industry were thrashing out their future. You didn't find any sand or straw huts at this Club Med. Instead, it was like a little village on a hill, clumped into groups of apartments. One was called La Cigale, the French for a cricket. Every time you passed through this area, you heard one chirping, so loud that I suspected the sound came from a loudspeaker rather than from the leg of an insect. All the bigwigs from the major software, hardware, and networking manufacturers were there. Big names, including Compaq, Microsoft, Apple, Novell, and the rest. The theme of the three-day conference was supposed to be the globalization of the market, but there were some underlying themes which also emerged. One was open systems, the idea that business users of computers, whether mainframes, mini-computers, or PCs, can seamlessly connect them all together. Large companies have data residing on systems throughout their organization. For some time, they've realized that the only way to ensure they retain control of their corporate data is by hooking them up to each other. Unfortunately, there are just so many hardware, software, and network sockets spread over so many sites that connecting them isn't easy. A few years ago, the large manufacturers pretended it was. They told big business that buying their products was a cure-all. That all seems to have changed now. IT managers and large businesses have been burnt so many times by the major manufacturers that they're in rebellion. They're demanding open systems and clear standards. And suppliers, possibly for the first time in the short history of computing, are responding to users' needs by swearing, hands on heart, that they all believe in open systems. Even IBM, champion of proprietary systems, which always tried and usually succeeded in tying users into their buying web, has recently espoused the cause of open systems. The trouble is, many manufacturers have already confused the issue and disappointed the IT business community by failing to supply kit which actually does deliver real-world solutions. And while users definitely want and need open systems to tie their data together, many are skeptical whether the manufacturer's recent conversion to the cause will produce results. With shrinking markets, the large computing giants of the past are being forced to find new markets. Most European suppliers seem to be far more realistic about 1992 and its implications than US suppliers, who tend to regard Europe and Eastern Europe as cash cows.
Mike McGee there giving us his snapshots of his holiday with Club Med. Well, just before we leave you, the news headlines again. Half the Unix installations in the UK are illegal, say vendors. Computer Associates spreadsheet SuperCalc drops in price to £79. And IBM's Colour Portable will be on the horizon sooner than we thought.
Well, that wraps analysis up for this week. It just remains for me to say thank you for watching and goodbye from us all here at the Computer Channel. Goodbye.